Hello, everybody. Jim here on this fine evening, enjoying a nice cold adult beverage, and once again talking to my microphone. Tonight, I'm going to be talking a little bit about the prices for retro games here in Japan because in a recent video I did, I do a series of videos where I'll recommend some Japan exclusive games for a specific console. And when I'm recommending games, I also take a quick bit of time to discuss what the prices of those games are. And because I know most of my viewers don't actually live in Japan or maybe don't have many opportunities to travel here, I give the prices that the games go for online, typically eBay prices. And on the most recent one I did, somebody had commented that that I always discuss the online prices, but what about the prices in the wild here in Japan? So I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about that now because, like I said, most of my viewers don't live in Japan, don't necessarily travel to Japan all that often, so their best bet for buying import games is online. So that's kind of what I'm sticking to. Unless there comes a day where the majority of my viewers live in Japan, then I could start doing that. But I figure now is a good time to just go ahead and talk about the prices of retro games in Japan and I guess how I've seen them change over time since living here. I first moved to Japan in the summer of 2010, and at that time, it's fair to say prices were significantly lower than they are now. Even in the places where prices are pretty much always high, they still weren't that high at the time. Just as an example, it's kind of common knowledge now that Super Potato in Akihabara, their prices are pretty high, like approaching eBay levels. And it wasn't like that when I first got here. In fact, my first weekend in Japan, a friend of mine, he had taken me to Akihabara, and I, at the time, really only knew about Super Potato, and I specifically wanted to go there. And I mean, I guess if you were looking for like really rare stuff at the time, they would have still been expensive. But I went there and just, that first time bought a Super Famicom and loose carts of Super Mario Kart, Zelda Link to the Past, and Rockman X. And I would say the whole bundle probably cost me in the area of maybe $70 or something like that, 60 or $70. So for a console and 3 great games, I was willing to pay that. But more recently, it's gotten more expensive, and I think it's almost like the rules for real estate when it comes to like retro game prices here. The 3 big key issues are location, location, location. And it feels like if the shops are located in an area like Akihabara, which gets a lot of tourist traffic, that's the place you're going to see some very high prices. Because typically when I do go to Akiba, if it's for filming or to just like hang out, or if it is to go and buy some games, a lot of the people that I see in the game shops, especially Super Potato and usually the retro game camp locations on the main avenue, most of the shoppers inside are foreigners, are tourists, I'm assuming. I don't know who does and doesn't live here, but I'm guessing that a lot of them are tourists, and I in fact have met tourists there in Akihabara and gone around to some different game shops with them, and people that basically they'll come with like an empty piece of luggage, and in the course of their time here will buy enough games or whatever else to fill that piece of luggage up to take back with them to the States. So I think that's kind of like a big thing that's affecting the game prices in shops where there's like a lot of tourism, is they're counting on people who come here and go on like just kind of like a binge shopping run to essentially just throw a whole ton of money at them to get games. I guess like they really desperately want import stuff that's either difficult or impossible to come by where they live, because just in West Tokyo, for example, where there is far less tourist traffic, because Akiba, places like that, Akiba and in Shinjuku and other areas, stuff that's in central Tokyo, that's where there's a large concentration of tourism. But out in West Tokyo, not so much, and that's where there are a ton of hard-offs and book-offs. That's where I used to live, and that's where I filmed all of my like old hard-off videos before I had moved back to the States for a year or so. And when I first arrived here and I first discovered hard-off, I could not stop going there. I was in there every weekend buying stacks and stacks of games because everything was so cheap. And to this day, if you go into a hard-off, they will have those bargain bins where you can find games and controllers and peripherals and things like that for 100 yen each, which is basically like the equivalent to $1. So that hasn't changed at all. I will say that hard-offs have started to increase their prices. It used to be there weren't really any like games that were singled out as being more valuable. Nowadays, though, when I do go to hard-offs that carry a lot of games, there's always going to be a glass case, and high-value items are always going to be in there, and they're going to be priced as such. But in general, if you just go to the racks, and especially if you go to the bargain bins, you'll still find good prices that are way, way under eBay prices. It's just you have to be willing to go to those locations, which might be a little out of the way. Like I said, West Tokyo is not like a huge attraction for tourists, but that's typically the area, the less foot trafficked areas. That's where you're going to find better prices. If you're doing all your shopping in Akihabara, for example, which is great for like convenience and selection, you go there are so many shops, and they're all so well stocked that if there's something you want, it's almost like guaranteed that you're going to be able to find it. It's just the prices, again, are very high, at least approaching eBay levels. So in some instances, you know, I know some people that they don't like turning to eBay because the prices are so high, and some people come to me wanting certain games. Like there's essentially two kinds of buyers that I deal with. Some people will give me however X amount of dollars and say, I want some decent games for the Saturn or the PC Engine or whatever, and they kind of trust my judgment, and I get the most for them for their dollar. Other people will say, I want this specifically, I want that specifically, and it's almost always something that's like a really high value game, something that's rare or much sought after, and they come to me because they think by buying it from me, they're going to get a better deal than they would off of eBay. But a lot of those games are really like very uncommon to come by just in a random hard-off somewhere. For the most part, you're going to need to go to a game shop to find those if you're not buying them online. And when you go to those shops, you're not really getting a much better deal. So it's getting that bad, and I think it's for the two reasons that, yes, there's like a lot of tourism there, and there are a lot of people that are willing to spend a lot of money in there because I guess in their heads, it's kind of like that reasoning of like, well, when am I going to be here again? I really, really want this. When is this opportunity going to come up again? It's at least a little better than eBay prices, so why not? I feel like that's happening over and over and over again. I think everybody has seen those pictures of Super Potato when their shelves were kind of bare. That's actually kind of a routine thing. It's like it's cyclical, where they over like certain times, like in the summer, for example, when there's a lot of tourism, they will, I guess their shelves will almost be stripped bare in some instances, like PC Engine, Sega Saturn, Neo Geo stuff. Those shelves will be stripped down pretty extremely, and then they restock, and kind of like that next tourism cycle comes up, they get bought out of a lot of stuff again, and they restock again. So when those pictures were taken, that was just like at a low point. So their stock is constantly going down and up again, because I feel like tourists show up in droves, they buy a shit ton of video games, they dump a lot of cash into that neighborhood, and then they're out again. And then on the other hand, they pretty much know that they can make a boatload of money in online sales as well. And I think those things are kind of driving prices up, because honestly, the retro gaming scene here and the game collecting scene, at least as far as I know and in the circles I run with, I guess, quote unquote, it's not like, I think there's a certain like culture that's created via social media in the US and Europe that isn't necessarily there here in Japan. Like, I've had this conversation with Shinichiro, who is the owner of the bar A Button. If you saw the little bit of coverage I did in there, and I did an interview with him as well. And one night, talking with him about retro gaming and game collecting, and then I started to talk to him about YouTube and some of the YouTubers I enjoy watching. And then I asked him and some other patrons at the bar if there were any retro gaming YouTubers they enjoyed watching, and they kind of really couldn't come up with any. And it was in their opinion that Japanese retro gamers are more concerned with playing games than they are with like discussing them or like sharing their hobby. So they kind of thought that most Japanese gamers are going to be like too busy playing their games to give a shit about a YouTube retro gaming channel, or discussing their collecting or gaming ways, or really having like that like communal thing that I guess we have on YouTube and in Facebook groups and things like that. And I think, I don't know, maybe that kind of keeps it from being as popularized as it is in the West, because again, like I said, when I go into these retro game shops, the majority of the people I see in there shopping aren't even Japanese. So I don't know if maybe the retro gaming craze isn't something that's touched Japanese gamers as much as it's touched gamers overseas, and maybe that's where the majority of the money comes from, and that's what keeps the prices in tourist areas high, but the prices in areas where there are less tourists and less foreigners relatively low. I'm guessing that's what it is. I'm thinking if you're buying your games here in an area like Akihabara, or maybe like in Nakano at Nakano Broadway, places like that, if you're buying your retro games there, then you're going to see prices that are comparable to like eBay prices. They might be a little bit under that, maybe just enough for you to justify to yourself buying the game there instead of buying it online, but they are going to be high. On the other hand, if you're willing to travel a bit, go to areas where maybe there's like significantly less tourism, but you'll find hard offs and other things like that. Hard off, hobby off, book off, even another chain of stores called Geo, and I'm sure there are plenty of other recycle shops as well. If you're willing to go to those, I guess, less popular areas, you'll find games for less. But I think hard off and those chains of stores are catching on with their prices. They're still way better than anything you'll find in Akiba, sometimes ridiculously cheap. If you just lucky enough and you land on like a really good shop, you can get tons of things for dirt cheap, but you'll usually find like a glass case where they still keep their high dollar games. And I realize this is like a long-winded answer to someone that was just like, well, what are the prices like in Japan? It's like an answer with like, or it's a question with two answers. It depends on where you're shopping. Again, location, location, location. A busy area with lots of tourism and dedicated game shops, the prices are going to be high. A more rural area where there are only recycle shops and not much tourism, the prices are going to be much lower. And again, I think the spike in prices is primarily due to online sales and tourism. That's just my personal opinion. If you are a retro gamer here in Japan as well, what do you think? What do you think about prices? What do you think is or is not driving them up? What do you think about the retro gaming scene here in Japan and the collecting scene as well? Is there something I'm missing? Am I out of the loop? Which is very likely, because I'm not exactly like the most friendly with Japanese retro gamers. I don't run in a lot of circles, I guess you could say. But these were just my 2 cents. It was a question that got me thinking, and I felt like answering it, turning on the microphone, drinking a beer, and answering a question. Anyway, thanks everybody for listening. Let me know down in the comments what your impressions are of retro gaming in Japan. Have you been here? Have you done some shopping? What did you think of the prices and the experience? I'd like to know. And until next time, thanks again for listening, everybody. Take care. Goodbye.